The chilling mystery of Jack the Ripper, it it endures, doesn't it? A puzzle from that autumn of 1888 that still really commands our attention.
It absolutely does. And for over a century, I mean, countless people have been suggested as the killer who terrorized Whitechapel.
So many theories. But one name, well, it often surfaces near the top of those lists, both official and unofficial. Montague John Druitt.
Mm-hmm.
His life ended tragically right at the end of 1888. And that circumstance just inextricably linked him to the Ripper's reign of terror, which seemed to end around the same time.
Right. The timing is key there.
Examining his case, it really gives us a window into the challenges investigators faced back then. And it shows why, despite all the years of new information, the truth is still so elusive.
It's a classic example of the difficulties.
So by looking into his story, you'll get a better sense of the complex web of circumstance and, frankly, flawed information that keeps his name so prominent in the Ripper story. Stay with us as we explore the compelling but ultimately uncertain case of Montague John Druitt.
Montague John Druitt is, he's central to a lot of Ripper discussions, mainly because of that timing you mentioned. He was born in 1857, which made him 31 years old in 1888.
Okay, so 31, relatively young compared to some other names that have been floated over the years. What about his background? What do we know?
Well, he came from a respected family. He was educated at Winchester and Oxford, which definitely points to a privileged upbringing.
Right.
His father was actually a surgeon. And that detail, well, it later fueled speculation about the Ripper maybe having medical knowledge.
Ah, okay. The surgical skill idea.
Exactly. Though it's worth saying that pathologists have always debated how much actual skill the killer really showed. Druitt's main job was as a barrister, but he also had a second job as an assistant schoolmaster down in Blackheath, South London.
And it was right at the end of 1888 that his life ended so tragically. Can you walk us through those circumstances?
Yeah, his body was found floating in the Thames on December 31st, 1888.
December 31st, wow.
And a really striking detail reported at the time was that they found 4 large stones in his pockets.
Stones. To weigh him down.
Clearly intended to do just that. The inquest that followed returned a verdict of suicide, whilst of unsound mind.
And he left a note, didn't he? A very short one.
Yes, very short, but incredibly poignant. It just read, "Since Friday, I felt I was going to be like Mother, and the best thing for me was to die."
Like Mother? That's significant, right? Points to family history.
It points directly to it. There was a history of severe mental illness and suicide in his family. His mother had actually been confined because of mental illness, and she died in an asylum not long after him in 1890.
Oh, wow.
And his maternal grandmother and an aunt had apparently attempted suicide. Plus, an older sister also killed herself, though much later in life.
That's just a devastating family history. It certainly lines up with the tone of that note and the verdict.
It gives context for the unsound mind verdict, definitely. Yeah. And there was another big event right before his death. He was dismissed from his job at the Blackheath School.
Ah, the schoolmaster job. When was that?
It likely happened on November 30th, 1888. Now, that date was a Friday.
The Friday from the night.
Potentially the very Friday he mentioned, yes. The reason given for the dismissal was just serious trouble.
And we don't know what that serious trouble actually was.
No. The exact nature has remained a subject of, well, intense speculation ever since. Some people have guessed, purely conjecture, really, based on later comments, maybe something related to homosexuality or even molestation. But there's zero documented evidence from the time to confirm the reason.
So it's just unknown.
Pretty much. When his body was recovered, besides the stones and the note, they found some cash on him, 2 checks, maybe a settlement from the school, perhaps a season rail ticket from Blackheath to London,
Okay.
and importantly, an unused return ticket from Hammersmith to Charing Cross, dated December 1st.
December 1st, the day after he was likely dismissed. These details paint a picture of someone in deep crisis. Dismissal, the note, the suicide.
Immense personal turmoil, potential ruin, absolutely.
But how does this man, a barrister, schoolmaster from Blackheath, who dies by suicide, how does he get linked so strongly to these brutal murders happening over in Whitechapel?
The fundamental reason, the one that really first drew attention to him, was just the timing, pure timing. His death was December 1888.
Right.
And the last widely accepted canonical Ripper murder, Mary Kelly's, happened on November 9th, 1888.
So the crimes seem to just stop, and then very shortly after, he dies. That coincidence, I mean, It is compelling just on the surface.
It is. It provides the main circumstantial link, and this timing was really highlighted by Sir Melville Macnaghten.
Macnaghten, he was high up in the police.
Assistant Commissioner. He wrote these handwritten memoranda in 1894, and in them he explicitly named Druitt as one of 3 key suspects.
Okay, so Macnaghten is crucial here. What was his theory?
He theorized that the Ripper's mind essentially snapped, his brain gave way after the extreme violence of the Kelly murder, and this led the killer to either commit suicide or end up in an asylum.
I see. And Druitt's suicide seemed to fit that narrative perfectly.
From Macnaghten's viewpoint in 1894, yes, the timing fit his hypothesis neatly.
So it was largely Macnaghten, writing years after the fact, who kind of solidified Druitt's place as a prime suspect. He's within certain police circles.
He certainly put it down in writing in a way that's been hugely influential, but there might be an earlier hint, too.
Oh.
There's an account from Albert Backert, who was part of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. He claimed that some police officials told him back in March 1889 that the Ripper was dead, and that he'd been fished out of the Thames 2 months ago.
2 months before March 1889. That would be January 1889, right after Druitt's body was found.
Exactly. So if Backert's memory was accurate, it suggests the police might have already been looking at a man found drowned in the Thames before Macnaghten wrote his famous memo.
That's fascinating. It suggests the idea wasn't just Macnaghten's creation years later. Okay, so let's look at the points people raised that seem to support the idea that Druitt could have been the Ripper.
Okay, based on the sources, several things get mentioned. His age. For one, he was 31. That fits reasonably well within the range given by some key witnesses who saw the suspect. Their estimates varied, but often landed somewhere between, say, 28 and 35.
So his age aligns with at least some of the eyewitness accounts. Not all, but some.
Correct. Then there's the fact his father was a surgeon. That's often brought up, suggesting maybe he had access to anatomical knowledge.
Right, the idea the killer knew anatomy. Though you said that's debated.
Heavily debated among pathologists, yes, about the killer's actual skill. Druitt also had a mustache. That's a feature reported by 3 significant witnesses, although, again, the color they described varied a bit.
Okay, so age and mustache, some potential overlap with descriptions. What about general appearance?
His social standing, his appearance, might also fit some accounts. Witnesses described the man variously as shabby genteel, respectable, even prosperous looking.
And Druitt, as a barrister and schoolmaster, would look respectable.
He certainly would fit that kind of description. It contrasts, though, with one witness who thought the man looked more like a sailor.
Okay.
And then, of course, the points we already mentioned, being explicitly named as a suspect by a high-ranking police official, Macnaghten, and that crucial timing of his death right after the last murder.
Those are the points that, initially make you think, okay, maybe. But then there are some really significant arguments against Druitt being the Ripper. Points that seem quite hard to reconcile.
Yes, the counter-arguments are substantial. A really major one is his lack of any known connection to Whitechapel itself.
He wasn't from the area at all.
No, he lived and worked in South London, in Blackheath. The murders all happened in a very specific, quite confined district across the river in the East End.
So he wasn't a local. That immediately throws up logistical questions, doesn't it?
It certainly does. You have geographical and transport challenges. Sources indicate there wasn't an all-night train service between London and Blackheath back in 1888.
No all-night trains.
Nope. So committing murders in the very early hours in Whitechapel and then getting back home to Blackheath undetected before the first trains started running, well, that would have been extremely difficult. Maybe impossible depending on the exact time of the murder.
That's a critical point. Just the travel involved for some of those crime timings seems like a massive hurdle.
Perhaps even more damning are his documented movements. Things he was known to be doing.
Like what?
Like playing cricket. Sources detailing his life show specific dates where Druitt was definitely playing cricket somewhere else, either on the day of a murder or immediately after.
Cricket? Seriously?
Yes. For example, Annie Chapman was murdered around 5:30 a.m. on September 8th.
Okay.
Druitt is documented playing cricket in Blackheath later that same morning, starting around 11:30 a.m.
So, commit a brutal murder at 5:30 a.m. in Whitechapel, get back across London, clean up, change, get to the cricket ground in Blackheath by 11:30.
It seems highly, highly improbable, to put it mildly. And there are similar scheduling conflicts like that for other murder dates, too. Like the day after Martha Tabram was killed in August, and the day Polly Nichols was killed at the end of August, he was playing cricket.
Wow. Cricket seems like a surprisingly solid alibi for several key dates then.
It creates a significant problem for the theory, especially if you assume one person committed all the canonical crimes. His physical build is another point often raised against him. He was described as slender.
Slender. But the witnesses?
Witness accounts generally described the Ripper as being medium to heavy build, stout, or broad-shouldered. So another discrepancy there.
Okay, it does match the build. What else?
Well, some witness descriptions specifically mentioned the Ripper looked foreign or like a Jew.
Yeah.
Those descriptions simply don't fit Montague John Druitt, who was English from a professional family background.
Right. A motive. Was there anything in his life pointing to why he'd do this?
Crucially, no. There's no established motive in Druitt's known life or background that would explain these horrific targeted attacks on women in Whitechapel.
And no physical evidence linking him. Nothing found at the scenes, nothing connecting him to the victims.
Nothing whatsoever. And perhaps the most compelling point against him comes from Inspector Frederick Aberline.
Aberline. He was the lead detective on the ground, right?
Exactly. He led the investigation in Whitechapel. Years later, Aberline stated quite clearly that there was absolutely nothing to connect Druitt to the crimes beyond the simple fact of the timing of his death.
The lead investigator himself wasn't convinced. That really carries significant weight, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
So given these strong counter-arguments and the questions around how he even became a suspect via Macnaghten, how reliable was that initial crucial information from Macnaghten?
And this is where the case for Druitt really runs into major trouble. Macnaghten's 1894 memoranda, the very document that cemented Druitt as a suspect for many, actually contains significant factual errors about Druitt himself.
Errors? Like what?
Well, Macnaghten stated Druitt was about 41 years old. He was actually 31.
10 years off.
Yeah. He incorrectly identified his profession as a doctor. Druitt was a barrister and a schoolmaster.
Wrong job, too.
He also wrongly claimed Druitt lived with his family. Records show he lived alone in lodgings at the time. And perhaps most importantly, Macnaghten seems to have miscalculated Druitt's disappearance and suicide date. He placed it around November 10th, immediately after the Kelly murder.
To fit his theory.
Exactly. When the evidence, like that unused train ticket, suggests it was much closer to December 1st.
So the very foundation of Macnaghten's suspicion, the timing he emphasized, seems to have been based on incorrect facts about the man he was suspecting.
Precisely. It significantly undermines the reliability of that key piece of evidence. And Macnaghten's assertion that Druitt was sexually insane and that his own family believed him to be the murderer. It's also questionable. Macnaghten said this came from private information, which he then claimed to have destroyed. The way he phrased it suggests it might have been hearsay, maybe rumor, not necessarily direct information from the Druitt family themselves. There's no independent confirmation of it.
Right. And that phrase, sexually insane, that's caused a lot of debate over the years too, hasn't it?
It really has. In the Victorian context, some have argued that sexually insane could have been a kind of code, a euphemism perhaps, for homosexuality.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Which led to speculation about Druitt's sexuality.
Yes. It's led to speculation about whether Druitt might have been gay or bisexual. But again, there is absolutely no documented proof of this. The speculation really stems from Macnaghten's ambiguous phrase and the observation that Druitt, a man of his age and class, never married or apparently had a known girlfriend, which was perhaps unusual for the time.
Okay, but how does this speculation about his sexuality or this idea of being sexually insane actually connect to the specific nature of the Ripper crimes themselves?
Well, that's where it gets very complex and debated. Some modern profilers, like former FBI agent John Douglas, have categorized the Ripper murders as lust murders. They discuss concepts like piquerism, which is gaining sexual gratification from penetrating with a sharp object, the weapon as a proxy.
Okay.
However, the sources also point out there seemed to be a lack of evidence of actual sexual intercourse at the crime scenes. And no clear evidence of semen was reported, although, forensic capabilities back in 1888 were very limited compared to today.
Right.
An argument sometimes made is that sexually sadistic killers usually target victims of the sexual orientation they're attracted to. So if the victims were women, this argument goes, it would make a homosexual Ripper less likely.
But there are counter-arguments.
Sure. Counter-arguments might bring up piquerism again, suggesting it might not require direct sexual contact in the conventional sense, or they might raise the possibility of bisexuality. Ultimately, though, there's no actual evidence linking Druitt's alleged private life or sexuality, whatever it may have been, to the specific horrific violence seen in the Ripper murders. It tends to remain purely speculative.
So when we really boil it down, what we have with Druitt is A suspect whose main link is basically a coincidence in timing,
Pretty much.
who was named years later by a police official whose notes about him contain multiple significant factual errors,
Yes.
and against whom there are really compelling contradictions regarding his likely whereabouts on key dates, his physical appearance compared to witnesses, and his known character and connections, or lack thereof, to Whitechapel.
That sums it up very accurately. Montague John Druitt remains a prominent name, almost entirely because of that initial timing coincidence and Macnaghten's influential but flawed memorandum. But when you actually weigh that against the specific details we have from the sources, those potential alibis, the physical mismatches with descriptions, the lack of any connection to Whitechapel, and the proven inaccuracies in the key document naming him the case against him, looks very weak. It's circumstantial and just riddled with inconsistencies that are really hard to ignore or explain away.
Macnaghten's information being so demonstrably wrong about Druitt's basic details, that really does cast a long shadow over the credibility of that specific accusation, doesn't it?
It has to. And it's important for you to remember, too, Macnaghten himself named other suspects in that same memo, like Kosminski and Ostrog.
Sure.
And other investigators, other theorists over the years, have favored entirely different individuals based on their own analysis of the evidence. The whole theory that Druitt was the Ripper relies so heavily on aligning his personal tragedy, his dismissal and suicide, with the public terror in Whitechapel, based on historical accounts that, when you look closely, contain serious inaccuracies. It just makes it impossible to say with any certainty that he was the killer.
The enduring mystery of Jack the Ripper, and looking specifically at the case of Montague John Druitt, it really reveals so much about the challenges of historical investigation, doesn't it?
It's a stark illustration, absolutely. It shows us how even official records and accounts from the time can be incomplete, they can be flawed, they can be based on rumor or assumption rather than properly verified fact.
Yeah.
It really forces us to confront just how difficult it is to piece together events from the distant past when the key witnesses are long gone, the documentation is imperfect, and the biases or maybe just the misunderstandings of that era can completely cloud the picture.
So despite being considered a leading suspect for well over a century now, the question of whether Montague John Druitt actually was Jack the Ripper remains completely unanswered.
Completely. And perhaps the most striking takeaway from looking at his specific case is the reminder that sometimes the person who seems like the most compelling suspect might simply be someone whose own devastating personal crisis just tragically and coincidentally happened to overlap with a period of intense public terror,
leaving their name forever tangled up in a mystery they might have had absolutely no part in.
Exactly. It really prompts you to consider how historical narratives can get shaped by incomplete evidence, and maybe by our own human desire to find an answer, any answer, even when the actual truth remains stubbornly just out of reach.